The house that I grew up in was built in 1803. The family who built it are buried in a small family plot about half a mile behind the house. There are groundhog, gopher/marmot, holes all around, possibly going down to the coffins themselves. Anyway, for about the first 3 or 4 years after we moved into the house, both my parents and myself all reported hearing footsteps creaking in the main hallway and moving towards the master bedroom, but only when we were alone in the house. We'd get up to have a look thinking that somebody had come home to find the hallway empty. Sometimes, if you had your back to the doorway and the TV off, we'd get that feeling that somebody was looking over our shoulder. You'd turn and there'd be nobody there. You could feel the hackles raise on the back of your neck when that happened. When my brother was a year or 2 old, my bedroom was moved down into the basement. It was nice. The whole basement was finished, and with 2.5-foot fieldstone walls it was quite cozy. Private too. Unless my parents were having a party, I had it all to myself after 10 o'clock. One night, about a year after I moved down there, I turned off the light by the door and crossed the room to get into bed. My cat was there waiting for me, and he cuddled up along my side as usual. About 5 minutes later, I could feel him stiffen, and then he got up and started a low growl. I opened my eyes, lying on my back, and could see the ceiling. Everything looked as it should. Then it dawned on me that I could see the ceiling. Remember those thick walls? That meant that the windowsill were like the gun embrasures on forts, deep and angled. The curtains were green corduroy and lined. I always pulled them very close against the window frames to keep out the headlights from cars on a turn on the highway about a mile away. No light ever got through them. So I laid there thinking for a moment. How could I see the ceiling? The door was closed. The curtains were closed. The room was usually pitch black. And the cat was now standing up, facing across me. And shaking. I turned my head and could see a light between me and the door, closer to the door. It looked sort of gray or perhaps slightly bluish. It was like a swirling, light smoke. It started a foot or 2 off the floor and went to about eye level. I don't know why, but I got the impression that it was somehow sentient. It didn't do anything overtly threatening, but I just didn't feel right about it. What could I do though? It was between me and the door. I was trapped. So was the cat. I got out of bed, never taking my eyes off the light for a second. I could see everything in the room in a sort of pale, bluish-white light, just barely illuminated. I stood up and the cat hopped down on the floor beside me. Steeling myself, knowing there was no other way out, and not wanting to stay there any longer, I ran for the door right through the light. When I went through the light I felt cold. Almost clammy. I burst through the door, down the hall and straight up the stair. The cat passed me on the way. I went to my parents' room. They were still awake, watching TV. I told them what happened and they came downstairs to look, but of course there was nothing there. That night I slept on the couch in the living room, but it was uncomfortable, and there was so much light coming through the huge floor-to-ceiling windows on the far side that I barely got any sleep. The next night my parents were downstairs in the bar outside my room when it was time for me to go to bed. With that assurance, and the fact that the cat had no problems coming in with me, I went to bed. Nobody ever saw or heard the ghost again after that. My father said though it was the original owner of the house checking to make sure we were keeping good care of the house. When it saw we weren't doing anything to harm the house, it finally left. That was in the early 60s. 50 and more years later, my mother had died, the house had been sold, and my father was on his deathbed in palliative care. I went with a friend to visit the house and show her where I grew up. I had told her that the house might have been haunted but hadn't said much else about it. For her part, she'd said she was sensitive to those things, having spent her early years living in a castle in Europe. Anyway, I knocked and the new owner agreed to show us around. The first destination was through the dining room into the main hall. My friend immediately crossed the hall to stop in the door slightly inside the living room. She turned and said, "This is where the sounds of the ghost came from, am I right?" She was spot on. That had been exactly where the sounds of the footsteps had seemed to be coming from. And I hadn't told anybody exactly where it had been. My 2 brothers and I all experienced a spirit at a certain age, at a specific time of night. When we reached the age of 7 or 8, we were all visited by the spirit or a young boy, who appeared as a shadow on our walls. He didn't do much, he just waved to us and left, so we called him Waving Boy. My older brother, he just stared at it. When he told our mother, she told him that he was just waving to himself. However, when he told her that he didn't wave back to it, she became concerned and said it must have been a dream. The whole concept of waving back to something that wasn't real startled her. In my case, I was extremely upset that there was an apparent intruder in my room, so I did the logical thing and ran to my mother's room to tell her. I dragged her by the arm across the hall, but the shadow was gone. She believed that I must have had a bad dream, so she went back to bed. The next morning, she wanted to know what my dream was about, so I explained it to her, and she came to the conclusion that we must have had a ghost of some sort, considering how me and my brother had similar cases a year apart at the same age in the middle of the night. We kept the whole waving boy thing from my younger brother, and just let it happen naturally for him. I don't think he would have enjoyed the idea of a shadow spirit spontaneously appearing in his room, waking him up and waving at him from a wall. I can't remember what his reaction to it was. A few years later, we had to move due to family issues and sold the house. My parents didn't mention Waving Boy to the buyers, so I hope they are enjoying themselves. Heard they were starting a family and having kids, so I'm pretty sure they'll get a visit. I can say that I have been to my first and last haunted house. I must admit that I didn't really think much of it when a co-worker from out of town wanted to visit a local haunted house. You may have heard of the Sorrelweed House in Savannah, Georgia. It was in an episode of Ghost Hunters and is often within the top 5 to 10 most haunted destinations in the U.S. Savannah itself was built on top of soldiers and slaves left in shallow graves, and remnants are always resurfacing during floods and new construction. I'm not one to be easily impressed or shocked. I don't know what to tell you other than the things that I observed. My coworker and I arrived and found that we would be in a group of about 10. It was a beautiful spring night in historic Savannah. We all went inside and the guide spoke about different things as we walked upstairs into a parlor. She had us wait to watch a video, but I was distracted by the guy on the balcony. He looked inside and then kept going on about his business, whether it had been cleaning or whatever. My coworker asked what I'd been looking at, and I told her that I was just looking out the window. The guide walked in and explained everything about the room, including a male spirit in particular who likes the corner and the balcony right outside it. She described him perfectly, and I felt a bit sick because no one else had seen him and a few eyes were now on me. I hoped that the entire thing was a ruse and braved a closer look outside, but the state of the outer area would not allow for a grown man to easily get up there and walk around as effortlessly as the male that I'd seen. We continued from a haunted drawing room to haunted dining/ballroom, and others kept asking me if I saw anything, and I didn't, though it may have been because I truly didn't want to either. We then were to go down into the cellar. I just wanted to leave but had seen too many movies to think of separating myself from the group or to walk at the front or rear of the line. I remained right in the center for better or for worse. We made it to the cellar and were given EMF readers and were able to take turns going into a room with a male spirit who preferred women so much that he would sit on the sofa beside them. I went the safer route and walked into a nicer portion of the cellar with 2 older women. We were chatting for a few minutes when a long wailing scream cut me off and I turned toward a brick wall. Our EMF meters had reacted and I just stood there wondering if it was one of our group or someone else. It had sounded far off, as if the woman had been about 100 feet away, but there was nothing there but a solid brick wall. The women noticed that there were no speakers and no holes, so that wouldn't explain how I heard a scream. Just brick separating us from solid earth, and the scream had been crystal clear. I really wanted to leave. Casper the friendly ghost did not live here. We had one last stop in a haunted carriage house where a slave had committed suicide. I saw nothing and heard nothing. My coworker and I ended up staying late and speaking with the guide while comparing notes, and she was thrilled with what I'd described. She hadn't witnessed all of what I had but had similar notes from a few others during past visits. I'd finally felt relief as I cranked up my car. I had just pulled away from the house when I felt pure fear take over. I broke out into a cold sweat, and just knew that I should be terrified. I had this overwhelming need to look in the rear view mirror and see who was in my backseat, but I couldn't do it. I tried to look and my eyes would always dart back to the road at the last minute. I didn't get the same vibe as my dandy second-story spirit, or even the cellar woman. I said prayers that I hadn't said in years, made up some new prayers and sang any religious song that I could, though I'd forgotten many verses. The feeling of utter terror and despair vanished a few blocks away from my home in a singular tingle up my spine. I've worked with some very dangerous animals, don't freeze up in emergency situations, and am fazed by very little, but that moment and feeling is something that I will never forget. I relayed this to my grandmother, who somehow always knows when there is new life in the family, often before the mother is aware. She has only been wrong twice, and it turns out that those were miscarriages. My mother would wake up in tears and know that someone in the family had died. I listened thoroughly and said that we should never do things like that. Oftentimes spirits, whether good or bad, want to be seen and heard, which can be detrimental if they know you're attuned to them, and you were probably shining like a beacon. Hey there! I'm new but putting my all into sharing real horror stories. Your support is my motivation. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your comments mean the world to me. Let's make this journey together. Around 10 years ago, my first husband and I were shopping around to buy our first house. On this occasion, my mother-in-law came with us, and when the realtor pulled up to one house to show us, as soon as we stepped inside the foyer, my mother-in-law grabbed my arm and said, "You don't want to see this house, let's leave now." I laughed her off and said, "Well, we're here now, might as well see it," and ran up the stairs right into the master bedroom. I'll never forget standing in the middle of that room. The most horrible feelings came upon me. I felt intense anxiety. I had been happy and cheerful just a moment before, and a feeling of desperation and that I couldn't breathe. I was stuck, rooted to the spot, and couldn't move. I was terrified. My mother-in-law walked slowly into the room, grabbed my arm again, and gently pulled me out, as she could see I was rooted to the spot, and again said, "Let's leave now." I immediately agreed, and we left. Once outside, my usual happy demeanor came back, and I asked the realtor, "What on earth happened in that house, as what I was feeling is not normal?" She shrugged and said she didn't know. I wasn't satisfied with her answer, and my curiosity was piqued, so I did a bit of investigative work. This was in the days before the internet, so I went back to the neighborhood and knocked on some doors to speak with the other neighbors. Turns out an Asian couple had last owned the house, who had 2 young children under the age of 10. Apparently, the husband came home from work one evening after working late and went into each child's bedroom and suffocated each, and then went into the master bedroom and with a black plastic garbage bag suffocated his wife, and then shot himself after he had killed all of his family. I guess what I had felt was the intense fear of the wife, as her husband was murdering her. When we viewed the house, it was totally vacant, and I don't know about the other rooms as I only was in the master bedroom. I'm quite surprised that this wasn't disclosed, as it's illegal not to tell potential buyers, and I think even 10 years ago it was illegal not to disclose this type of information. I never did go back again after my investigation, but to this day, I am curious as to whether whoever bought the house had any kind of feelings as I did. My guess is that the house is now torn down with a new one built on the lot, as I'm only mildly aware of paranormal activity, while my mother-in-law was highly aware, and if I could feel it, how could not anyone else feel something as well? But again, this was more than 10 years ago, and I've never been back. This is what happened to a woman I knew who lived in a house with ghosts. This happened in Cincinnati, Ohio quite a few years ago, but it was one of the most dramatic encounters with a non-physical entity I've ever had. A man called me and told me his wife had attempted suicide by opening a bottle of pills and was about to put all the pills in her mouth. He happened to be at work and just happened to call her at the precise time she opened the pill bottle. The phone ringing brought her out of a trance-like state. She was not suicidal and did not even know what she had done, but she felt something was compelling her to kill herself. I don't think it was a coincidence that this house was located within less than a mile of 3 cemeteries. I think what we are seeing were the ghosts or spirits of some who were buried in those cemeteries, and they were looking for a house to live in. Some spirits don't even realize they are no longer alive in a body. One of the creepiest things in that house was a face that appeared on the living room wall that looked like paintings you've seen of Jesus. But in about a minute it transformed into an image of the devil. What I've said so far is not the part that was most scary. Those were run-of-the-mill phenomena I've seen many times. But what I wanted to know about was what caused the wife to feel compelled to take pills and then not even know she was doing it. That sounded like some kind of possession I had heard about, but this woman did not seem in any way to be possessed or have irrational or abnormal behavior. She told me the incident took place in the master bedroom, so I asked them to go outside on the driveway while my friend Walt and I would explore anything out of the ordinary in the bedroom. I didn't want them in the house if anything got out of hand. As Walt and I were walking to the bedroom, it struck me as odd it was that the house was cold when it was the middle of the summer, with the temperature outside being in the high 80s and all the windows were open. I think I concluded then that the house must be well insulated, but I was to find out later there was another explanation. Once in the bedroom there was a heavy, depressing feeling that I sensed was strongest in one corner of the room, so I asked Walt to go over to the corner and tell me if he noticed anything odd. As he got to the corner, he was thrown back across the room several feet, and he said it felt like an electric current had shot through his body. I've never seen him so scared, and he said he would not stay in that house for even another minute, and he left and joined the couple on the driveway waiting to see what I'd do now. I honestly don't know what that was in the corner, but it felt evil and dark, whatever it was. Not one to be deterred by such things, I had to find out for myself, and as I approached the corner I felt an ominous presence threatening me if I didn't leave. The dark presence knew I wasn't going to leave like my friend Walt had done, and I was not impressed with paranormal tricks. Well, I didn't leave. Quite the contrary, I challenged the evil presence, and said I wasn't leaving, but it was. I then did a couple things I had learned that could remove evil spirits, and the energy in the entire house changed. It also felt noticeably warmer, and I called to the people who lived there to come in and tell me what they sensed. As the woman arrived at the front door and stepped in, she stopped and said the energy was gone, and in fact, she now felt there was love in the house. I suggested they move, as I couldn't guarantee the spirits would not return, and that is what they did. Within 2 weeks they found another place to live and never had any similar problems again. Since that experience I've helped de-haunt many homes, although I no longer do that kind of work. As soon as I had a look through this one house, I just felt that it was negative. But we were desperate for a bigger house, and it was 2 houses down from my mother, so we took it. The people who lived there before us only stayed a few months, then up and left out of the blue. Another stayed only a month and left. I think I know why. The manhole used to open on its own. It was in the laundry. It happened so much that I made my ex put locks on it. The laundry and that back part of the house was where it felt the worst. When we would boil the kettle, the lid would open and it would just keep boiling, and boiling until you took the kettle off the stand or unplugged it. Bought a new kettle and it did the same thing. I was in my bedroom putting makeup on when the sliding door to my wardrobe slid open, and out the corner of my eye I saw a small child run in there, then the door closed. I thought it was my son, so I asked him, "What are you doing in there?" At that moment my son walked into my room to ask for a snack. We left the bedroom real quick. The bathroom always smelled like sulfur. I thought maybe there was something wrong with the drains, so I was always cleaning them, trying to get rid of the smell, but it would never leave. When in the shower in that same bathroom, I'd always hear what sounded like party music in the distance, no matter what time it was, morning or night. I was watching TV in the lounge one day and heard really loud, heavy footsteps run from the laundry to the front door, in the hallway. Called out to my son, and he was in his room watching TV, so it wasn't him. My son's bedroom was right next to the laundry. He started waking up every night crying. He would see a black shadow person. He was terrified. He would get up to sleep in my bedroom most of the time 'cause he hated his room at night. I felt random cold breezes that literally moved my hair in my son's bedroom. In bed one night I felt my son crawl into bed with me and lay next to me. I rolled over to put my arm around him to hug him, and my arm went straight down and hit the mattress. No one was there. I was terrified. I heard weird screams in that house. I don't know how to describe them. A woman screamed, but it sounded echoed but wasn't echoing? I have no idea. I heard it twice. I had a dream that me and my son were sitting on my bed, and I had a feeling to look under the bed, so while still on the bed I poked my head down to look under there. I looked from side to side and saw nothing. But then a scream so deep and loud came from every direction under my bed. I felt the hot breath on my face in the dream and woke up boiling hot straight away. I had sleep paralysis for the first and only time in that house. I was having a nap during the day and randomly woke up to the blankets covering my face. I couldn't move. I felt claustrophobic, then felt something on me, watching me. I was trying to call out to my ex but couldn't. I was screaming in my mind. Eventually I fell back asleep. I was watching TV one night and saw a weird clear shadow walk from one side of the TV to the other. As it walked past, there was static in front of the TV. My ex was a skeptic, until he finally saw something other than the kettle, the manhole, and the music in the bathroom. One night we were in the lounge watching TV. When he had to go to the bathroom, I saw him walk into the hallway to go to the bathroom. Then he reversed and walked back and stared at the laundry, out of sight from where I was sitting. He was white as a sheet. I straight away said, "You saw it, didn't you?" He came back into the lounge looking like he was going to faint, and told me next to my son's room in front of the laundry door he saw a little boy whose face was so white, and it was only the top half of him, no legs. We both went and got my son and put him in our room, then went to bed. I saged the place and kept telling it to leave as it's not welcome in my house, showing no fear. But I felt scared the whole time and felt like it thought it was funny what I was doing. I felt it follow me around every time I did that. Ended up leaving that house. I felt like there was a child and an evil being there. But I've heard demons can present themselves in the form of a child to try to trick you, so who knows? Quite a few years ago, there were 4 of us. My ex, myself, and my first 2 offspring. I was in need of shelter. We were outgrowing our present abode. The local newspaper had a listing for a house for rent very cheap about 20 minutes north of us. I drove north that fateful morning, and I encountered a short, overweight lady about 20 years my senior. She seemed nice enough, and I asked if there was a typo in the ad. She exclaimed, "Oh no, that's the right price." She even knocked half off the deposit. I shook her little chunky hand, and asked when I could move in. "Today if you want." I told her the weekend would do. She gave me the key. I drove home, absolutely giddy. I went home, picked up my ex, gave her a big hug, and told her the great news. It was a fantastic day. I had use of a full-sized pickup over the weekend, and we got moved in. I noticed on one of the trips through the front door a bunch of tiny holes in the door frame. The next trip through, it dawned on me what it was. Someone had shot the door and frame with birdshot from a shotgun, more than once. Then the front door had been replaced. The noise must have been horrendous, for there was a large roofed front porch. The whole neighborhood must have heard it. Hopefully, that shotgun didn't get used inside the house. That's pretty weird, I thought. I made a mental note to ask the portly landlady about the door frame. I shan't be covering all the incidents that took place beyond that damaged door frame. The first one, though, was pretty good. I was sitting on the couch late one night, watching local news on the TV. Suddenly, one of the front bedroom windows had something thrown through it. I looked at my ex, and she grabbed a pillow, held it close to her, and motioned for me to investigate. I still had my work boots on, so investigate I did. I turned on the old overhead light, with its barely acceptable 40-watt light bulb, and started expecting to see glass on the wooden floor. I examined the first entirely intact wooden-framed window, then went to the other wood-framed window. Nothing. All glass, a little smudged, but whole and intact. I went outside and examined the other windows. Each one whole and unbroken. There was the initial glass breaking, then as each shard of glass hit the wooden floor, more breaking glass, but yet. I examined both neighbors' windows facing us the next morning. No broken windows. Probably 2 nights later, the ex and I are awoken to our 3 small kittens going nuts in the living room. Small little mews as little furry bodies thud into wooden walls. This house was built in the early 1930s. I reached up and turned on the 40-watt light bulb. I looked at the ex, she looked at me, and we listened as our kittens were having a grand time, little claws working to gain purchase on the bare wood floors, then bouncing off of table legs, or thudding into the couch. "What is with those guys?" I asked. The ex shrugged her shoulders. Then I glanced down at the foot of our bed. 2 little furry kittens sound asleep. I got up, trotted into the bathroom, turned on another dim light bulb, and went into my kids' bedroom. At the foot of my daughter's bed, another kitten sound asleep. Well, that was good enough for me. I went back to bed. That happened 2 more times, each time whatever was clawing up the floor and thudding into each other, and the walls were not our kittens. Each time, at night, waking us up. My daughter weighed around 40 pounds. One night, about a week after the first kitten or whatever the heck was in the living room incident, I heard my daughter fall out of bed with a soft thud, wrapped in her blankets, then go into the living room, and into the kitchen. There was vinyl tile in the kitchen, and I heard her bare feet walking on it. Then she stopped. I got up, went into the living room, turned on the light, and went into the kitchen. No daughter. I went to her bedroom door, opened it, and there she was tucked snugly into bed, just as I had left her after kissing her good night. A few nights later, there was stuff going on in the day as well, but that crud is a whole lot harder to describe. Much more subtle mind F***K kind of stuff that only happened to me. That, and I don't like thinking about it. The ex and I heard the back wooden screen door slam shut. I waited till in the morning to check it out. The screen door was securely hooked, from the inside. Not even a month after first shaking hands with that portly lady, I was asking for my deposit back. "What are you trying to do, give me a heart attack?" as she dramatically clutched at her ample bosom. We could not get out of that damned house fast enough. I never did find out about the shotgun blasts to the front door. About a month later, my ex saw 3 lights about the size of flashlight bulbs, grouped together, floating in our hallway in the middle of the apartment. I asked her what she thought they were. "They were probably headlights from a car,"